Welcome to this midweek message. I'm Drew Goins. To have me, Pastor Bill Booth. We are continuing our Bible People A to Z. We've made it all the way to T, which there are several honorable mentions in T, from Thomas to Timothy to the two co-workers Paul talks about, Thaddeus, Tibet, Tola, all these things. But we landed on
Tabitha.
Tell us about, do you know what the name Tabitha means?
Do tell. What did you find?
Well, it's funny because even the footnote on the Bible app was like, this means gazelle.
Yes.
It also, other thing I found was gracious.
Yes.
Okay, so yes. I don't know how gazelle and gracious overlap, but I'll
graceful.
Graceful.
You would think you think of a gazelle being graceful, so then maybe you think of this idea of gracious, kind of coming off of this grace root, possibly. Anyway, yeah.
So Tabitha was also named, Doris. Am I saying that right?
No, Dorcas.
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 Yes.
One of those unfortunate names
yes.
in the Bible.
Yeah.
Gomer, the wife of one of the prophets who had real issues with that. But Dorcas, it's to us it's odd, but it was apparently a very common Greek name. So why don't we just we'll read the story today? Let's read it.
Let's do it.
This is a really great story, and it's pretty brief. And so, and just for context purposes, we're in Acts chapter 9. And if you begin the chapter, you actually have the whole conversion of Saul with Jesus, and the light on Damascus Road, and his call to follow Jesus, and then transformation not long after that you'll see the switch to his name to be Paul. He begins as Saul, he becomes Paul. You see all of that happening. That dominates the first half, almost 2/3 of this entire chapter is about that. And then oddly, it makes a shift, not odd, but it makes a shift back to Peter and the work that he's already doing for the gospel. And it was just interesting how that just sort of jumped. But if you think about the whole purpose of Acts, to tell us the expansion of the gospel and the move even into the Gentile world and beyond, it's important to see the expansion of the gospel and the key players, and this would be the disciples. So anyway, that's what we have picking up in verse 36 of chapter 9. Now in Joppa there was a disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time she became ill and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples who heard that Peter was there sent 2 men to him with the request, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter got up and went with them. And when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing their tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put all of them outside, and then he knelt down and prayed. He turned to the body and said, "Tabitha, get up." Then she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Meanwhile, he stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner. So, we have a fascinating passage here.
Yes.
Fascinating passage. And so, and again, just in context, what had happened just prior to this, when they picked up with the Peter story, he had healed a man, Aeneas, Aeneas, or I believe he had healed him. He'd been bedridden for 8 years, and Peter actually heals him, and word spreads in Lydda, and there is, a kind of a revival going on. So it's interesting from several respects. So he gets this word from these other folks, come quickly, or, come without delay. And one might question, look, you just saw revival break out in Lydda. Shouldn't you just stay and work that?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that pretty important? I mean, to do that. And in fairness, I'm not sure what he knew exactly about what he was getting into in Joppa.
Yeah, because the text tells us, please come at once. It doesn't give him any background of, hey, this is what has happened. It's please come at once. Which as people say that, that's like, my mind jumps to the worst. When my wife says, I need you here at once, I'm like, oh no, the house is on fire. There's a burglar. My mind goes to the worst things possible. When it's just the please come at once. It's I don't know. So maybe it's that same kind of context for him. He hears, "Please come at once," and it's like, "Oh, this is an emergency. I got to come."
Sure. But to be fair, the text does not tell us what exactly they told him. To be fair, it does not say that they said to him, "Come because we expect you to raise her," even though that's what he's about to do, or what's about to happen. So what I think we have to recognize is there is expectation that God will do something. They may not have even known what they expected him to do, but they were so devastated by this loss that they just of Tabitha that they just needed somebody to come and help them figure out what to do next. And when he gets there, you find that she's already dressed for burial. Now, it's important to also note that the Jewish concept of how they bury and death is a very quick process. As a matter of fact, it was a little bit interesting for me some years ago when I kind of learned, for us, we have the death, and then we have the preparation of the body, and usually that's done by professionals. And a funeral is usually a quick turnaround event, though not as much as it used to be. But you have this whole process of embalming and all these things that happen, and it takes time. And so there's a couple days out, but in the Jewish tradition, typically within 24 hours to 48 hours, they expect the body to be in the ground. And I realize that some of that has to do with sanitation, some of that has to do with other things. And again, this would be pre some forms of common embalming or whatever, but they would prepare the body, get the body in the grave, and then they would do all the other things. Then would come the funerals, then would come the mourning, then would come all the other pieces that go with that, because the immediate need was to get the body in the place, get it prepared, and do that. So, the sense is that the very little time has passed here, so these places have to be very close to one another. But they had already prepared her to go in the grave. They were following tradition. They'd prepared her to go in the grave, but they had not put her in the grave. He found her in the upper room in the house.
Yep.
They had not put her in the grave yet. So I don't know if that tells us that he got there that quickly, or if that tells us that they were holding out hope that he was going to do something, and they decided that they might give him a chance first.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about the timeline on their burial stuff, but I was, and I haven't looked, but the proximity of these two areas was close enough to where, and it could be a combination of both of them. But
Sure. So let's talk about the name just real quick, and this idea of the two names. So the Tabitha is the Aramaic, or actually in the Hebrew, it would be a name that would be a little bit different. It would be Zibia instead of Tibia, which would be the one spelling is actually with the TS, though one is with a Z.
We're going to use the T for the purposes of this
For the purpose of this podcast, we shall use the tibia, which is actually a TS, though. It's a TS to create that sound. And that is a name that was common, but was also shared among other people. The king of Joash, the king of Judah, Joash, his mother was a tibia.
Okay.
So this was a name that was around, and other people would have known that. But yet it's interesting that they use this Dorcas name. But you had a theory about that. Why do you think that?
One of the commentaries I saw was so that it would be known both by Jews and Greeks, essentially, at that point. So Dorcas is a Greek name, and this Tabitha, this is the Jewish side of things, so that it's like we don't want any confusion in who this is. This is who we're talking about. Right. I mean, there are other places where people have multiple names. They want her name to be known by everybody. And Correct. It's also, they may have seen some of so what we know about her, she's a disciple. She's always doing good work, as the NIV says. She's always helping the poor and charity, I think, as you read yours. Mm-hmm. Even we know from the widows that are around, she's made them clothing. They're crying and showing the robes that she's. So they want no confusion in who this person is. So that's why we kind of give both names. Sure.
And so speaking of that, things about which we don't know is the assumption is made that she is a widow. First of all, the text doesn't necessarily tell us that. It says that she made things for widows, but it doesn't necessarily tell us that she is a widow. It is odd that she is staying at the house of Simon the tanner. So if she was not a widow, that would be unusual. So probably she is a widow. But we also don't need to assume that that meant she was destitute. Though it is not often spoken about, there is a way in which property and land and things could be given to women, even in this time and in this culture, though it was not as common. Still, there was an inheritance that would come, especially if the males had not been available, had died out, or whatever, that there was a way for the property and things to go to the woman, and even the return of a dowry. If there was a death of a husband, she could be returned, those investments. And so it was not uncommon for every widow. You should not assume that the word widow was synonymous with destitute, though many were. But it sounds as though she was a person who had at least modest, if not more, means, and that she was industrious in that she made clothing for other widows who obviously could not afford that, which raises interesting questions about, what does that mean? She clearly had the skills to do that, but also took the inclination. But that still probably means that she was buying the materials and whatever. So she had to have enough means to do that. And so however you want to cut it, she was clearly taking care of the needs of the community in a meaningful way, so much so that her loss was devastating to this community, to which they cried out to Peter, "You just got to get over here. This has happened to us and we don't know what to do. You've got to come quickly, because we don't know what to do. We've lost the bedrock of this community."
This void from
Yes, right.
And this is the last we know of her biblically.
Yes.
We don't know if she goes on to what happens after. So
sure. Which, just as an aside and just for the fun of it, first of all, who could you think of in our community or in your life or in the world that's so indispensable that I would just be, not only devastated from a sad point, but devastated from a, oh no, what are we going to do point if they were gone? And then I guess secondarily would be, would anybody consider you that way?
Yeah.
Would anybody say, "Oh my, Drew's gone. We might as well just close the doors of the church. It's all over," And now that shouldn't be our response, because the church is more than just Drew or me or anybody else. But at the same time, I think there is a powerful statement here about how much her ministry meant to so many people.
That's good.
That there was this just sense of, oh no, this person is irreplaceable. Now, nobody should be irreplaceable because God has made us all with our gifts, and God is faithful. But just that sense tells me the depth of their love and affection for her, and that strikes me as a really powerful thing.
That's pretty good, especially when you put that back on us in the sense of like, no, who are you for that? So it kind of jumps to my application piece with this is how to use your gifts for God's glory and serving those around you. So she quickly figured out, this is my niche.
Yes.
This is my groove to do these things, always helping the poor, always about charity, the clothing things. So what is your impact? What is your gift? And the other of that is my other application piece. And as this hit me was like, she was the best of us, if we can kind of air quotes that. I don't know.
Sure.
But she's a good person. This would be the why does bad stuff happen to good people? Everything you can read, this disciple, good, helping the poor, is a good person, but she is not immune to the physical ailments of this world.
Correct.
She is not.
Correct.
Well, I guess when she got resurrected from the dead, a little bit, but she would go on to die again. But she experienced death in that this physical place that we have today. So I don't know, that hit me as well in doing this. But what about you?
So I think in addition to the things we just said, I think there is a question about legacy. And what does that mean? So you said we hear no more about her from the biblical standpoint. We don't, but we do hear about her from the post-biblical standpoint. And by that I mean that in my research, what I discovered is that this house of Simon the Tanner is in Tel Aviv, in Jaffa, and that you can actually visit what they believe to be the historic site, and that it has become almost a pilgrimage site for people over the years. You can actually find a grave a tomb that has been visited by many people. Again, sometimes you can question, is this exactly it? But my point is simply to say that it was meaningful enough to people to make it a destination.
Sure.
Over the years, her image has shown up in countless works of religious art, and those would be stained glass images in cathedrals, as well as other paintings and images. And even writers have been captivated. As a matter of fact, Basil of Caesarea, from a long time ago, wrote in his book of Morals, he has a passage where he talks about how widows should live, and he uses Dorcas as the example. Tabitha / Dorcas is the example of how you put your industry and your life to work. And that, in other words, your life still has meaning and value. Don't think that it doesn't. And this is a good example for us. There was another writer who wrote poetry, Robert Herrick, and he wrote the Widow's Tears, or The Dirge of Dorcas. And it was a poem about the life of Dorcas, again, assuming a widow. George MacDonald is a name that a lot of folks maybe aren't as familiar with, but he was a minister, but he also was a very well-known writer, and he would write fantasy pieces that in some ways were precursors to what C.S. Lewis did in Chronicles of Narnia. So they would be fantasy works, but they were used to tell Christian morals and stories. So in a way, it was a precursor to what Lewis did in the Chronicle of Narnia series, where he was able to tell this fantastical story, but in order to tell a deeper faith story. And he wrote a work about Dorcas as well. So, I mean, I'm just saying that, and there have been feasts in the church. Actually, there are celebrations October 25th, and a lot of churches has been a day where they celebrate Dorcas and some other leaders. So I guess my application is to say that the work that you do, it matters. And when you do that in a way that really impacts a community, it could actually impact others for a long, long time. Generationally could have impact that helps others. And there have been a number of ministries called the Dorcas Ministry over the years in multiple churches that care for the poor and the needy in the same vein that Dorcas did. And so I guess my point would be that, you know, what ministry could have a bearing from you? What thing could there be that you, legacy-wise, have left? And it's not about having your name on it, but about having your imprint of how is it that I used my gifts, my abilities to do that. So we had a person who was widowed, which was already one level of ostracized in a community. We had a woman who was another level of ostracized in a community, or placed in a position that probably would not have seemed to have had this kind of impact. But she overcame all those barriers through her kindness and her compassion that changed the lives of people around her and influenced people for the gospel in a powerful way. And so it's not about making excuses. It's about using your gifts and doing what you can do, and then leaving that in God's hands. So that's my takeaway.
That's good. And that's what we'll leave you guys with too. Where are you leaving your legacy? Where are you leaving your impact and using your gifts for God's glory? So I hope you enjoyed listening out there. Stay connected and stay encouraged.